Hi everyone, thanks for joining today's webinar on avoiding burnout, thinking about keeping up staff engagement and really managing for and thinking through the ways that we can prevent and then also react as an organization and manage burnout with our staff and ourselves as it can be inevitable in our work. So we're going to go ahead and get started in just a minute here. If you haven't yet, just kind of a quick look through GoToWebinar here. If you have any questions at any point throughout today's webinar, feel free to go ahead and submit them via the question box. What that looks like on this platform is a chat icon with a question mark inside of that. So if you have any questions at any point throughout today's webinar, feel free to go ahead and put any questions in that forum, and I'll make sure that we have some time at the end to answer any questions. Of course, if we don't get to your question, we'll make sure that we follow up via email with you. We'll also be recording today's webinar and sharing out the slides following in our evaluation survey. So if you would like the slides and the recording from today, please complete that evaluation and then you will get those sent to your inbox. We have people about 30 more seconds to start, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, welcome to anyone who just joined us. My name is Kiara Frechette. I'm the Nonprofit Programs Director here at Spur Local. And today we're going to be talking about avoiding staff burnout, keeping staff engaged, and if we are experiencing burnout, if our staff are experiencing burnout, just some things we can think about structurally at our organizations to help prevent that. And then also, if that is happening, how are we still managing our staff that are burned out, knowing that the work still needs to be done, and wanting to make sure that we're caring for our staff. So talking about both how to avoid and then how to manage within burnout. So the first slide I like to share here, just a couple grounding slides before we get into some tips, is really just around current data. And I really mentioned this for the data. And while, the focus of today's webinar is specifically on staff, that also includes you if you're an executive director. So what this data shares here, what I'm sharing is results from our executive director wellness survey. And we do this once a year to look at the wellness of our executive directors, see how their staff are doing, and really look at the data year to year. And so I like to start this webinar just really sharing because it's important to know kind of where executive directors are, where teams are as we go into this, because ultimately we can't engage our team if we're not engaged ourselves. And it's also helpful just to see how things are changing, how we're kind of moving forward, kind of coming out of a sector that's completely burned out to one that's still burned out, but kind of moving forward, getting folks continually engaged and thinking about how we're investing in the wellness of our organizations. So as we're thinking about this, 56% of executive directors report that they are or have recently been or think they're about to experience burnout. This seems like a high number, but it's actually much better than it's been in the last few years. We had just over 60% of executive directors in 2022 and over 70% in 2021 saying that they're burned out or have recently been burned out. That's, again, getting better, but that's still 1 out of 2. So just knowing in the space that this is what's happening, this is kind of what we're working within. And so as we go throughout today's webinar, if you are someone experiencing burnout or another executive director who is, just thinking about ways that we can either think about it, again, structurally at our organizations to help prevent and or work within burnout, kind of what makes sense there. And just overall, we had 170 executive directors fill out this ED wellness survey. So we feel like it's pretty representative of the sector, at least in the local DMV area. As we look at teams, 46% of organizations report that their team is experiencing the same level of burnout as the year before. So a little bit as we're thinking about this, again, in past, it's been there's less burnout. So again, shows things are improving, still means that people are burned out, still means our teams are burned out, but this is kind of the atmosphere that we're working in here. And then finally, as we think about this, also in the past year, we've been getting some information from our partner organizations around the benefits that they provide, knowing that burnout and wellness and how we support our staff administratively, benefits-wise, compensation wise at our organizations really plays all together in our staff wellness. Just had some stats here around how folks are investing in their organizations in terms of vacation leave, professional development, health insurance, and all of that. So again, as we're thinking about this, we have to be thinking about, like, one, that this is normal, burnout's normal, and as much as we can try to avoid it, and I'll give some tips for that today. It'll happen at some point in our organization. So how do we manage within that? And again, as I mentioned at the beginning, we can't engage our team if we're not engaged ourselves. And we know, especially with executive directors, there are limited resources to support the ED, and you need your board to be checking in with you and, thinking about your own wellness there. And especially with executive directors, it's tough because there's such a duality in your role, right? Your role is in charge of programming, business operations, and it's also in managing the board. So you're in a leadership role, but you report to a group of volunteers. So with that kind of push and pull and different dynamics can lead to a lot of executive directors feeling burned out at some point in their career. So again, this is just a context setting slide. I'd like to share this as we get into today, kind of the importance of thinking about burnout, whether or not you're experiencing it currently, again, as we go into today's webinar. Another contextual slide I like to share here as we start to frame the conversation today are just some causes of burnout. Sometimes this is helpful if we feel like, our staff aren't as motivated, you feel like the amount of work is too much, people feel burned out, maybe they're letting you know they're burned out, maybe you're feeling you're burned out. Sometimes having some root causes that we typically see, looking at them kind of backwards, problem solving and seeing, are these the issue, can be helpful in determining what the solution might be. So a couple things to note here that we see as some of the causes. Of course, there's more causes than just here on screen. This is what we see as most typical at organizations. One is around volume, and this is pretty natural, what we usually think of in terms of why people are experiencing burnout, but it's not the only reason. So with volume, that's too much work and or a high intensity of work for too long. Over the past few years, our work has changed. There's been an increased demand for our services and programs, and that high intensity, if we've been operating with that for multiple years in a row, can really lead to the burnout, the feeling that staff are exhausted and not motivated and don't have as much energy for the work. So that's one thing to be thinking about. Another cause of burnout can be management, whether that's a negative relationship with their direct manager or organizational leaders. If you feel like priorities aren't aligned, that can lead to burnout when people feel like they're constantly working in a different direction than leadership and management is towards a specific mission or vision for the organization. Another space here is recognition, so feeling work that is not seen or not valued. Again, this may not be the only reason for someone's burnout. A lot of these kind of play together so that, maybe your staff are experiencing too much work and no recognition. Maybe there's management that's tough, and also there's that they don't agree with necessarily, that the management isn't their style, isn't working for them, and the volume of work is too high. So kind of just trying to figure out, what combination of this is impacting your staff and or yourself. Another way we're thinking about this is impact. You can't see results or the difference that your work is making. A lot of the work that we're doing at our organizations is incremental. We unfortunately aren't likely to see the solving of the issues that our organizations are trying to make different and change. And so sometimes in the nonprofit sector, it is hard to see those results. And that, time and time again, especially with that volume of work, can be tough and unmotivating if you're not able to see that impact. As we think about that, no goals. Sometimes we see organizations go for flexibility, just knowing that goals can be a reason that people feel stressed out and burned out because they're not meeting their goals or they're too strict with the goals. But on the other end of the spectrum, a lack of direction sometimes feels like milestones or work feels unending, that we're not able to kind of stop, evaluate, and move in a different direction, that it's just so ambiguous that sense of purpose can be missing. And of course, especially in the nonprofit sector, emotional stress of work can add up over time. We ask our staff, and a lot of our staff are bringing their whole selves to work, so that could be contributing to this. But just overall, there's a lot of emotions tied into our mission and vision of our organization, our values, and how we show up in our work day to day. So also the trauma there, something certainly can be impacting people's engagement at work. So again, I won't go through how to solve each of these because it really is a combination. And as we go through tips, it kind of touches on all of these. But if you are feeling like maybe your staff are burned out or you're on the cusp of burnout, maybe worth it to be looking at each of these kind of categories and thinking about, okay, where could be the root cause of the burnout for my staff, and what are some things I can do to kind of work against this, kind of manage against this. Of course, people bring their full selves, their whole selves to work. So that could be contributing. It could be an outside factor that is not related to the work you're doing. And that's certainly possible. So also just thinking about how can we support our staff when life is something that they're, when they have their own challenges in life, how are we giving that space to have the balance that staff may be looking for? So first tip here is to really be thinking about, as you're thinking about burnout, as you're thinking about any sort of change, to help staff understand, that not everything is changing, and really scope any differences ahead. So if your organization's in some transitional period, if you're adding new programs, maybe you're evaluating programs, maybe you're doing the exact same work that you've been doing before. It just feels like it's more because there's more of a demand. Really important, again, to the ambiguity point of not having necessarily goals or keeping things super flexible. Important when a staff are feeling burnout to be able to quantify, kind of share what are the definitives. And how we kind of think about that is what's known and what's unknown. Making sure that staff know what we know and know what we don't know. Of course, there's some unknown unknowns, and the goal here is to prevent that, but really contextualizing for staff, what is known. So let's start by making it clear to the team anything that is changing or is known about or is not changing. As you think about this, you want to begin from a place of calmness, acknowledge, and you want to make your team feel as safe as you're able to. So as you're thinking about any change happening for the organization, especially if you feel like there's such burnout, maybe you're going into a strategic planning process, you're feeling like there's not much engagement. Okay, what's known? What do we know about the organization? What's not changing? Usually your mission of your organization, probably some pillar programs that you have, and letting staff know, this is what we know. On the other hand, thinking about what's unknown. So honestly addressing any expected pain points or uncertainty. Maybe there's a grant that may not come in, or your funding has changed. Letting staff know that this is where we are, and here's how we're going to stay updated, and what are your concerns about this? Maybe it's not that we're going to add XYZ number of extra programs to make up that funding. Maybe instead we're thinking about, okay, it's unknown how we're going to get this, but here's how we're going to make a plan, and here's how we're going to address it on the development front. So just kind of thinking again about what's known, what's unknown, sharing with staff that, and then especially really focusing on what's next. What are some next steps? When we think about next steps, kind of those action steps moving forward, it can't just be coming from the ED if there are other leaders at the organization. So if you have mid-level managers who are sharing out, maybe board, if it's helpful, can create that sense of direction. Here's where the organization's going. As you're doing this, highlighting opportunities for collaboration and continued support, making sure that staff know they are supported by others at the organization. It's not just on them to make these changes. That being said, if collaboration, if it feels like everyone has so much on their plates, that collaboration could be something that could lead to people feeling more stressed out, more overwhelmed. So you definitely want to think about your own staff, kind of the reason why they're feeling this way, especially as you're talking through any changes to the organization, to see if that would make sense as a helpful kind of next step. Similarly, around, tip number one, not everything is changing, and just acknowledging that not everything is changing when we're going through any sort of change with our organization, or kind of even if there is no change happening, just discussing any uncertainty. If you feel like uncertainty is a reason that folks are burned out, they don't know what's necessarily coming next, there aren't those goals, or they don't really feel, and can't always see that impact. A couple things to be thinking about as you discuss uncertainty, and just letting your team, really the goal here is to help your team understand what options exist. So as you're thinking about this, some big questions. One, what is priority over the next year? As organizations, if you have experience in the past, that knowing what's big level priority can be really helpful. We're doing all this work towards a specific goal, knowing that what's priority and then what's not priority. What are we not going to prioritize this year that maybe we have in years past because we have less staff this year? Maybe we have had more turnover than normal. Maybe we have more students who are taking part in our programming. So how are we going to prioritize their experience? And how are we also going to prioritize, our staff wellness? As you think about this, another big question to kind of be thinking about and kind of discussing is, how does someone individual work tie to your strategic plan or those big organizational goals? Again, as much as you can tie it to those larger goals that staff can see or others are working towards and contributing towards, can be really helpful. Additionally, how can staff request support if needed? When they inevitably need support, what is the right avenue? Are they coming to you? Are they setting up a meeting? Is it informal, formal? What opportunities exist for support? Just giving people, letting them know that there is that safety net of the organization that can support them. As you think about communication, just thinking about, how do we keep our staff aware of what else is happening at the organization? We know that some organizations, it can feel, especially around the collaboration point, that maybe people are on their own working towards separate goals. You have your development staff working on something, you have your communication staff member working on something, you have your program staff member working on something, and everyone feels like their workload is a lot. But sometimes those biweekly meetings can be really helpful to hear what are others working on. Again, where's room for collaboration, and also to get excited about work that isn't your own, and to understand that we're all working towards this goal together. So really recommend having those meetings, even if it's a short 15, 20-minute meeting, just sharing out what folks are excited on or working on or having challenges with, can be really helpful for that team morale. As folks surface larger concerns, just making sure that those concerns are surfaced and routinely discussed. If folks are feeling that they need additional support, maybe you're bringing in some interns over the summer or spring or fall. Maybe you're thinking about, okay, did that help you? Did that create more work for you now that you're managing? How did that turn out? So kind of testing out solutions and then following up with them. Maybe your staff are requesting a specific type of collaboration. Maybe it's something they want to discuss as a full team. Making sure that there's space dedicated to discuss that, and then following up. Was that the discussion you hope to have? What other outcomes would you like to see from that discussion? Just having space for those conversations can make staff feel heard and feeling, again, a contributing part of member of the team. Ultimately, as we're thinking about uncertainty too, just delegation. As we think here, very, very similar to the ED point. On the other, not everything is changing, but how are we delegating work? How are maybe roles and projects shifting? Tip number 3 here is, if you feel like you're on the cusp of burnout, maybe you're attending today's webinar because you're feeling that, your organization is right there. As a manager or an executive director, one tool to use with staff is really this payoff matrix. And what this can help do is provide a framework for staff's prioritization of work. Also something to use if you're a staff member being managed by somebody else. Could be great to use as work is assigned to you. What this really does is it maps effort versus impact. So when it feels like there's a lot on our plate that we have, because again, as small teams, we often are our own department of one or two. So how do we manage change? How do we manage the workload? If you feel, again, maybe volume is the reason there. So again, impact versus effort, you're looking at that. You're mapping out the different tasks you have, maybe for the month, for the quarter, maybe for the week on this chart. As you can see, high impact, low effort. These are easy wins. This is great. You should do these. These changes won't be hard. It'll make a difference. Can certainly pair these with strategic or rainy day efforts. This also helps to move the needle forward. Really great to have some easy wins, especially if you feel like your team is maybe working towards specific, public advocacy, or you're working towards like creation or expansion of programming, something that's kind of far off in the distance. You're working towards it. What are some easy wins to gain, to get people motivated, feel accomplished, and that they can take on this larger task? Strategic decisions, of course, are high impact, high effort. You only, as an organization, want to be focusing on one of these at a time and should be the major focus. Usually when we set strategic plans, we're having 3 to 5 goals. It doesn't mean that we're doing all 5 and accomplishing them all in 1 year. We're really creating that time horizon. So thinking about, how can I make sure that the strategic plan ties to performance goals, and how can I make sure that our staff, as we're thinking about this, are only focusing on one of these at a time, or kind of working towards, as an organization, one of these at a time. Filler are those low impact, low effort. It won't move the needle forward. Also probably not challenging. These are great to do on a quiet day if you need a break. Just getting in some filler work. Oftentimes this is what falls off our plate when we're burned out or time, really overwhelmed with work. Rainy day, this is low impact, low effort, still may be needed, might need a longer time horizon. This is sometimes more admin work that we might be needing to do. Save it for that rainy day, right? Again, could be similar to an easy win, can move the needle forward, but just sometimes needs to be done. And it's good just, again, if you feel, again, the volume is something that is the reason of burnout for folks, thinking about mapping out, the work that they're doing on this chart can be helpful to kind of contextualize and think about where should they be focusing their time. Tip number 4 here is more around performance. So I wanted to touch on performance here since this is really a place to address burnout one-on-one. And also, we know that sometimes the goals that our organization set or that we set as leaders, and these goals can lead to burnout because people feel that the work towards the goals can be too much, that it's not being managed properly, that they're not feeling the impact of these goals. So really performance ties really closely with this. If we're not seeing progress towards achievement, it can sometimes exacerbate that feeling of burnout. So as we're thinking about this, using performance, setting up at the outset, how performance ties to strategic or organizational goals, and how does our own development and organization, how is it mapped out throughout the course of the year, can be helpful and motivating to folks, especially if they're feeling this feeling of burnout. So one is goals, if they have set performance goals, reviewing progress towards them. Sometimes it feels like we are not making progress on our goals until we look back at our goals and realize, wait, I set them at the beginning of the year. I'm actually making great progress, or maybe I'm a little bit behind, but I'm further than I thought I would be. As we think about goals, you want to focus on the why and the how an outcome occurred, especially over the outcome itself. Especially in these days when things move so fast, we may not be hitting our goals, but how it occurred is really where we have that learning point, kind of the journey towards those goals, why we didn't hit it, why we did, is really important. That's that learning point and can feel that sense again of impact, of moving forward, of concrete. What can we be doing there? Again, using this learning to set future goals, and with this, reviewing some professional development. Do your staff set goals around their own professional development related to their role or kind of related to the organization? Are they meeting those? Are they spending time kind of developing themselves at your organization? Values are really great here too. You can add in 2 to 4 values, either organizational or new values into the performance review process. This could be anything about how the work is done or approached. Maybe your organization has a value of collaboration or innovation. If you are using these in the performance review, would recommend providing a description and some examples of how people could be exhibiting this. This is really helpful too, especially if your goals are larger for the team. Also showing up, how are we showing up at work? That's just as valuable to the work being done. And then finally, in a performance review, talking about team. So we're providing the context and kind of framework for a full holistic performance review, especially in burnout. That holistic view can be really helpful for people feeling the value in their work, also understanding where they may need to be focusing differently as they move forward or as new work comes in. So as you're thinking about the team, discussing interactions with the team and with you. For a manager, could be asking how you can be more supportive. For a team, highlighting value added, opportunities to add value to the team or how they've worked with others. Again, our goal here with a performance review is one to be evaluative, right? Show what someone's work has looked like over the past year, but also to be thinking about how can we appreciate and give our employees kind of the larger context of their work and not just their work itself, especially if it feels larger, if it feels not as collaborative, and kind of letting them know they're not an island in this. Outside of creating space and place for certainty, another tip we have here is really just setting goals and driving progress so staff can see their impact and use goals to drive engagement. So as we think about this, we really recommend making sure that as folks are setting new goals for the year, they're realistic, but the goal is driven by context in the past and not just hope. That they're focused. They don't have to be quantitative, but they do need to be precise. That we know about the process, that we're setting a process, we're thinking with our staff about the process, letting them maybe drive the process forward, or supporting them where they need support, because maybe the process is having them drive the whole thing forward is what's leading to their feeling of being overwhelmed. Asking your staff for ideas and getting feedback on their goals before finalizing. Again, giving them that autonomy to set the goals and then making sure it's a collaborative process. Again, I've mentioned this before, but you want to make sure that the goals aren't too large. Overly aggressive targets, vague generalities aren't always motivating. If it's too easy too, a simple win can be great, but you want your staff to feel like they're making accomplishments. Sending out an email sometimes definitely feels like an accomplishment, especially if it's a big email. But we don't want to be setting too easy of goals. We want to be driving forward progress for the organization, having staff feel like they're growing, and giving staff the space to perform at the level they're able to, if there are a lot of different factors contributing to their feeling. Tip number 4 here is to encourage professional development, building skills to drive growth. If your staff, if you've determined kind of the cause of burnout, maybe again is the impact or management of work, thinking about how staff are growing professionally can be something that could kind of mitigate that. And as we think about encouraging professional development, there's really 3 big areas to be thinking about. So again, this is more focused on the operations admin side of avoiding this and managing through this. But a lot of times we see staff maybe not performing because it could be something related to performance, could be something related to skill, and another is around experience. So as we're thinking about this, performance, these are goals around work outcomes, often manager led, but staff should convey if it's realistic. It's recognizing the outside, just making sure that in these conversations, you're recognizing outside things that could impact the realization of these goals. Focus is always on progress, not always the outcome. Limited performance that staff can drive. Another goal to be setting is around skills. So not just the performance side, mention this in thinking about this as part of the goal setting process, but this should be staff led. Manager's job is to ensure that skill aligns with work and other goals. Do you have a development director who wants to be a better grant writer? Are they building up that skill? Are they wanting to take some public speaking courses because they are going to donor meetings more often? So thinking about how does that skill line up with their job and ability to do their role. You want to ask them questions, get specific on what they want to build, and decide what success looks like together. And then finally, as you think about this, if you feel like those things are already being incorporated in your goal setting, it's just around experience. So final area of goals could be more around responsibility or experience. If folks aren't feeling that impact, or they're maybe you need to revamp the way they're being managed, and thinking about how they manage could be, that they're managing another staff member. Maybe they're launching a project, doing some donor facing communication. So thinking about how can we give staff those opportunities to grow their experience and have those stretch goals that allow them to get excited because it's professional and also supports the organization. As manager, though, your job here is just also to both protect the organization, ensure experience is not a sink or swim. Oftentimes when we think about this, recommend in giving folks experience-related goals that they watch once, they kind of observe, you discuss what you did, then you do it together, and then they do it and practice it. And then finally, last tip here is inevitably when burnout occurs at an organization, you want to co-create a plan. What are the pain points? What's tangible? What can we do? And what's motivational? If it feels like it's a one-off, this is just one staff member feeling this, surfacing pain points that staff members having. This could range from logistical. Maybe their home office is bad. Maybe they don't have those resources they need, to the organizational culture. They're feeling disconnected. Listen first, don't offer those solutions yet. What can you do that's tangible? We've spent a lot of time today talking about what is tangible. What could you do? But also an additional, could you give any bonuses? Is there time for time off? Is there new equipment? Happy hour, lunch, something you can do. These rarely move the needle alone. So it's usually paired with, here's what we can do right now to give you some space to solve this. But let's also talk about it. Let's talk about your work. Let's talk about the impact. Let's talk about new goals we're setting. So kind of pairing tangible with other pieces I've talked about today. And then in terms of motivational, this could be related to sense of connectedness, mission orientation, compassion, fatigue, things outside of work. So you want to get both issues, solutions surfaced by the staff. What are you experiencing? What do you want to do? How can I support you doing this? Especially if this is a performance-related conversation, you'll want to tie it into these items. If and when burnout occurs, one thing to do kind of is that re-engagement planning for yourself. It's separate than performance and engagement plans, really just keeping it to 3 to 6 months, shorter for more severity. But like have that mix of solutions, plan for communication, let them know it's normal in the sector now. We started out with those trends, and make them aware of their options. Checking in with them weekly, you're doing your normal check-in and you're also checking in, okay, how does the workflow feel? How do you feel about going into this? Can I take anything off your plate? Can you collaborate? Do you see room for collaboration? Making sure, again, it's a collaborative process to determine what the solution is, but offering that solution as a manager to let that staff member know that they're supported. That was a lot. I talked quickly. Engagement checklist, if you're thinking about what to do, there's a lot I covered, where to start. A couple things to be thinking about. One is check-ins, scheduling a one-on-one check-in for each staff member on your team. This is a great place to surface, especially if you feel like everyone's experiencing different forms of burnout, or people are feeling less motivated. Just checking in, see how things are going. How's the workflow? How's, maybe, especially if you gave someone a new manager role, a promotion, how's that going? Talk about that outside of the day-to-day to do, to see what you could be doing differently, or what they, being that sounding board for what they could be doing differently. Talked a lot about goals and performance, just focusing on how goals are impacting staff performance, and what professional development exists for staff, if that's something that you see they have the capacity to be thinking about. As changes come up with the organization, keeping staff aware of the wins that you have as an organization and any changes coming up, letting them know about those knowns and unknowns, addressing uncertainty, developing engagement strategies with burned out staff. What would be engaging for them? What are they excited? When they're looking at their portfolio, their to-dos, what are they most energized by? That can be the starting point for a conversation, especially if staff don't know where to start with tackling how they're feeling and how they're working. And then ultimately, creating that sense of culture, even at small organizations that have one or two to three staff members, just encouraging that peer-to-peer communication and tapping informal leaders. How can we work better together? Is there something that is not working for our organization that we need to change now? Is there something that we need to pause now? Because that will help us in the future go further and grow better. I'll pause here just to see if there are any questions. If you have them, again, feel free to drop them into the question box. Looks like a chat icon with a question mark inside of it. All right, I'm not seeing any questions. If you do have any questions, feel free at any point to go ahead and reach out to us. We're always happy to provide you with additional tools around this, or if it's helpful ever to set up a one-on-one call and talk through what your staff are experiencing and ways to think about it. Always happy to do that. Just let us know. But thanks for being here, and we'll catch you next time.